Hey everyone, this is George Wood, the Tattooed Pastor, and this is The Sober Truth. I am excited today to talk to you about how faith and recovery are intimately linked and have a powerful role in helping people heal. We believe that understanding and supporting those who are hurting is key to helping them overcome. So we have conversations with people that have different testimonies in life as well as roles in helping others to overcome. And we just hope that these conversations can lead us to a better understanding of what it takes to walk through darkness and find the light. Please leave a review and subscribe to hear more content, and enjoy the show. The rest later, but you are with The Sober Truth, and I am sitting here with Mr. Timothy King, the man, the myth, the legend, the one that I have wanted to bring to you for so long. Tim, do you go by your full name, McMahan King, Tim King? Which one do you go by? Because looking you up on the internet is actually a challenge.
So Timothy McMahan King is the full name, but you could just call me Tim. I threw everybody, I changed it when I got married. And one of the funny parts about this is I was in the midst of writing this book before I got married. So I just want to give everybody advice. It's not a good idea to buy your first home, publish your first book, and get married within 30 days of each other.
Oh my
Terrible
goodness.
idea.
Yeah,
but
right.
Testifies to the strength of that I, married the right person because we were just stronger together through it all. But I actually had to have the conversation. The publisher asked, "Hey, we're finalizing your book cover. What's your name going to be?" And that was what started the conversation with my wife of how we were going to handle name changes. So Timothy McMahan King.
What was your name? How did you change it when you got married?
So I added the McMahan. So I went from Tim King to Timothy McMahan King.
Oh.
But it's nice because McMahan means son of the bear. It's an old Irish name. So it just feels like this, fun addition of like son of the bear king. I like it.
I love it, man. I didn't know that. So it was her name.
Yes.
Okay. All right. That would explain some things. Okay. So looking you up is like a challenge, and, trying to figure out, I'm like, I know he exists. I did meet this man. I have his book. So, okay. When did you get married?
I'm a real person.
You're a real person.
Yes. So back in 2019.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. Okay.
We got married May 11th, 2019. The book came out June 11th.
All right, so let's jump right in. So let me think of the best way to approach this. So for those of you who don't know who Tim is, he has been a Christian majority of his life. I'm just going to give you the snapshot, and he's going to fill in the blanks. But Christian, missionary, loved Jesus, living out a life, working for an amazing Christian organization, doing all the right things, and never in his wildest dreams did he think his life was going to end up in addiction or on that path of brokenness that so many of us, you probably could have told early on we were going to end up there. Not him. He was going to be set out for the gospel, and then through one turn of events after another, his life completely changed. And his story is powerful and dramatic in every sense of the word, because he articulates better than I've ever heard anybody do the power of addiction and the way that it takes hold of our lives and what needs to happen in order for us to break that. And so, Tim, why don't you fill us all in on what exactly happened in your life?
Thanks, George. And it's great to be on with you. It's been so much fun to get to know you and your work and the uncovery work that you're doing. And for me, you're right. I was raised in a good home. I was one of the few lucky people. When you look at those adverse childhood experiences, that you've done a great job of talking about how important that is to understand when we're talking about addiction. I was lucky. I didn't have any of those adverse childhood experiences before the age of 18. And not a lot of people can say that. That was a great blessing in my life. But you're right. Life throws us these unexpected moments. And there I was 25 years old, working in Washington, D.C. I had what I thought, was going to be my dream job, and I'm in the middle of it. I'm loving it. And one day I wake up with a severe pain in my abdomen. I go into the hospital. It turns out I have a case of pancreatitis. The doctors were wondering, why did an otherwise healthy 25-year-old have pancreatitis? They started to do some tests and procedures, and they found out why. It was this weirdly formed little duct down near my pancreas that caught a small gallstone. But at the same time they found that out, the scope they were using to check it out hit the pancreas, and it caused acute necrotizing pancreatitis. So the next thing I know, I am in acute respiratory distress. My organs are shutting down, and I'm in the ICU. And I've got a doctor standing over my bed saying there's nothing left we can do. And my family is saying tearful goodbyes. But I pulled through. And after a few months in the hospital, I was sent home. And, there's what I've heard someone call before, like these casserole moments in a church life, right? So there's some times when a good local church, they really know what to do when somebody has a new kid, or maybe you get a cancer diagnosis and people show up with food. They show up with a tangible way to say, hey, I'm here, I support you, I love you. And that was what it was like to be sick in the hospital. People showed up, people were caring, I got get well cards, my family got support. But with what happened next, when I was sent home on heavy doses of Dilaudid and fentanyl, my prescriptions began to run out faster and faster. And I was using when I didn't intend to use. I was using more than I was supposed to be using. And I found that what had previously been a medicine was now grabbing hold of me in ways that I didn't want, but felt powerless to combat. That's a whole different area. And it was something that I kept quiet for a long time because I knew everybody would write get well cards when I was in the hospital. But I wasn't sure how people would react if they heard that I had an opioid use disorder. And so I kept it quiet for a long time. I kept it between me and my family. And I was lucky in what happened next. But it's such a difficult challenge right now in churches today. Even those churches that know what to do when someone gets sick, when someone gets addicted, a lot of people freeze. They don't know how to respond. They don't know how to engage. And that's why I'm glad you've got a program out like this to just keep this conversation going so that we can reduce that stigma, so people can feel free to have these conversations and to respond in compassion, as we've learned to do in so many other areas.
Yeah, I think, I have a friend now that is, I don't, without saying too much about who it is, but basically similar story. Not a person destined for addiction. Strange medical condition happens and ends up finding herself addicted to painkillers, because what I like to say is the greatest antidepressant ever made is the painkiller, right? So you're feeling, not only does it relieve physical pain, but it relieves psychological and mental pain. It is that connection to our lack of connection that we often feel. And that's the part that people don't understand. And something like severe pain and sickness makes us lose connection with those that we love, right? And so for like a guy like me who scores very highly on the ACE test, I lost connection early in life. A guy like you has connection, wonderful connection, and then this sickness comes and separates that connection. It breaks that connection off because now the people you're connected with don't know how to continue to connect, and you don't know how to connect with them either. So it's almost like this divide has happened. And so there is a way a traumatic thing can happen that can sever connection in a way that a person is snapped into early onset addiction or the opioid abuse disorder, the language that we use today. And you were that person. or a person like that, and just like a friend of mine now, she's not where you're at. I have her reading your book because she's not quite to the point where she wants to tell anyone. She talks to me because of who I am and how, my reputation of helping people, but no one in her circle yet knows. And I get that, and I respect that. It's her story to tell. It's her truth. If it's a her, I just want to say that. I'm just, just to clarify. But the reality is there's people that are going to be listening to this. And one thing I want to be clear, I want you to kind of go a little deeper on is, if I was to just hear that, it sounded like, so everything that happened to you happened what? And it took just a month or two? So maybe tell a little bit more about how, from the moment you got sick to, let's just say, how it played out.
Yeah. And one thing that I think that's so important that you just said that I want to highlight too is how effective painkillers are as an antidepressant temporarily, right? Because I grew up, we grew up with the dare and the just say no to drugs, right? Where everything was using drugs is stupid. And I think that's done a huge disservice to us on education and prevention. Because the dangerous thing about addiction is not that it always lies, it's that it only tells part of the truth.
Yeah, that's good, man.
And when we are hurting, these substances do a very good job temporarily relieving those symptoms. They don't solve the problem, but they do temporarily relieve our symptoms. And that was what was hard so I, was in the hospital. The doctors were like, your body was in so much pain, we're not sure you would have survived without us giving you this medication. And that was when it was a benefit. And that blurry period, right? Because this is a spectrum. It's not an either or. We're on a spectrum where I slowly was moving towards that drug causing more harm than good. And so what happened for me is, I'm out of the hospital. I'm a couple months out. And at this time, I can't eat. So like I'm about 170 pounds right now. I dropped down to about 125. I was just skeletal at this point. And I would have to hook up for 12 hours a day to an IV bag to get all my nutrition. And as soon as I was trying to start to eat, I could not digest anything because of the level of opioids I was on. I had what they call gastric paresis. It was shutting down my digestive system. And my doctor saw what was happening. And this is where my story differs from so many other people. And I'm still so grateful for this doctor. He's looking at my prescriptions running out. And what normally happens at that point is the doctor gets angry, starts to make accusations, starts to blame the patient, and then forces them on a quick taper saying, I am done with you. You're an addict. I don't want to touch this. I want to move on. You're not going to be a trustworthy patient. And that person gets cut off. And what happens time and time again is that person then starts going doctor hopping, where they're showing up at the ER and they're looking for that pain medication. Or they start to turn to street drugs. And street supply is far more dangerous than anything you're going to get through a prescription. But I was lucky because my doctor had such a different view. Instead of assuming the worst about me, he said, Tim, I want you to know you're addicted to your pain medicine. And that was when I could remember what it was like. I was so defensive. I was ready to argue with him. I was ready to tell him why I still needed and he just goes, but you didn't do anything wrong. And I relaxed for a moment. I was like, oh, because I had in my head, right? I wouldn't have said it, but I had in my head, if you get addicted, you're bad. You're just a bad person. You're a weak person. You're immoral. That was what was in the back of my head. And when he said you didn't do anything wrong, I was able to relax. And then he said, and I believe that you're still in pain. And those words were so important for me because those of us who have suffered, maybe it's physical pain, emotional pain, some kind of trauma, right, that people don't always see or don't always recognize. But when you hear those words, when you feel seen in that way, it switched this from being a confrontation where I was going to be told I was bad to somebody who could confront, but in the best sense of the word, to see me face to face and to see
Mm.
where I was coming from. And then he asked another very interesting question. And he was a pancreatic doctor, so I wasn't expecting this. He goes, Tim, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? And I started to tell him about what I wanted to do, that I wanted to write a book someday, that I had all these professional hopes, goals, and dreams. He said, great. And in 5 years, do you see yourself still on the pain medicine, or are you off it? I said, well, I'd be off the pain medicine by then. And he goes, great. Then we're on the same team. Let's work together.
That's awesome.
So over the course of the next 5 or 6 months, I got some basic outpatient counseling. So working on cognitive behavioral therapy, understanding what my cravings were, learning how to deal with those, learning new tactics for how to take less of that pain medicine. And by the time we hit month 5, I was almost completely off the pain meds and heading in the right direction. And now there were some other setbacks along the way. I had a surgery the next year where I was put back on pain medication. And because I hadn't fully accepted what that had meant to me before, I started down that slippery slope once again. But once again, what brought me back was compassionate observation from others saying, hey, Tim, how are you doing? And allowing me to see myself for what was happening. So it wasn't a smooth path all along the way. But what stands out to me in those moments was not any of the harsh words that were ever said to me. It was feeling like I was being seen in the midst of my own pain, someone that understood that what I was trying to do was address pain, and then giving me new ways and new tools to set up those habits and patterns and relationships that I needed to be and do differently in the world today.
You know, it's I don't know what makes it so hard. I guess just the fear of not being comfortable talking like that, asking those questions in that way. People, immediately want to go to you're an addict or this is addict behavior. Instead of being able to have that compassionate question of like, what's going on? Because your situation is one that is, profoundly like clear in the sense of like Tim before the sickness, Tim during the sickness. And so there was like this clear distinction, but the question that the doctor finally kind of highlighted for you is really the same for all addicts, which is like, what's happened to you? You are an addict, but it's not your fault. You're in pain, and I see that. So let's address that pain. And so, like, people want to gravitate to like, okay, we're going to cut this guy, Mr. Tim King, some slack because, it was a unfortunate circumstance that led to his addiction. But this guy, we're still going to treat like drugs are bad. Drugs are you stupid if you do them. So therefore, you made the decision. You deserve what's happening to you. But the question really is a question of pain. And it's just a question of where that pain came from. And then the really to begin to work our way out of this crisis is to begin to help, understand better ways of walking people through that pain, because that's what it is. It's a pain. It's not about, this fallacy of choice where people just want to choose to go get high. It's hard to like, I love how you use that spectrum language because it's not black or white. It's a spectrum. There may be days that a person does choose to just get high because they want to, but then there's days that people get high because they have to. And so it's like this understanding of this spectrum. Now, what I want to ask you is, you've had other surgeries, and let me just say this: I tore my I have a severe bone spurs or whatever. And my shoulder is completely jacked up. I have surgery on the 14th, and it's so bad that I'm trying to move the surgery up because the pain is so bad. In case
I'm
anybody
sorry,
wondered why
man.
my
Oh,
hair's out of place. I can't even lift my hand. I can't get
oh.
my freaking, can't lift my arm up to do my hair. So if I look bad, just that's humor. But anyways, so I have to be careful because I'm going into this surgery now. I know my drug addicted mind is I already know that, right? So I'll have to go into this and I'll have to say the words of, no, I don't want any opiate painkillers afterwards. Obviously during the surgery, please, do what you have to do, but yeah, don't give me just like a towel to bite onto or something. So, but I know that like my addictive behaviors coming afterwards. Now, is that the same for you? Because your addiction is smaller in the spectrum of your life. It was a time, and you understand it differently, and you shouldn't just start taking painkillers. But would the temptation be the same way for you as it would be for me?
Um, so I think it's going to be as diverse as every person is, but some of the same core. And this is where just even with my wife, I've talked about this of like, hey, if I end up having another surgery or if there's something emergency, I'm in a car accident, here's how I want to handle this. And what we've discussed is in this situation, we would definitely not go to opioid pain medication if we didn't think we needed to. But then if it was for some reason that bad and that necessary, if we were to be sent home with a prescription, I would not hold it. It would be something that she would take it and she would be the holder of it and she would dose it out to me as prescribed because I could say like the one thing that I don't want to do is be overconfident, right? I have been humbled in a way that I need to be very realistic about my tendencies towards unhealthy patterns and behaviors. And I think that awareness is something that is important in all of our lives, right? There is a significance of being humbled, right? And not humility as this fake sense of, oh, I'm not good at this thing or I'm not good at that thing, but a real humility in being able to see yourself in the midst of your own brokenness, in the midst of your own weaknesses, and understand that, but not be captivated by it,
Mm-hmm.
not be subservient to it. And that for me means, yeah, there's a little bit of planning that goes in. There's the acknowledgement that I need to have, like, I need to be in there with my spiritual practices. I need to be in there with my prayer life, with meditation, with breath work, with all of these different healthy behaviors that can help sustain me in the way and the kind of life that I know I am to lead.
Mm.
And I think there is, a hubris sometimes of people who haven't had the kinds of experiences we have, because there is an illusion of control and an
Mm.
illusion of having it all together that if it always breaks in our lives. It just matters what it looks like when it breaks, because ultimately there's just so much more going on. We're not in control,
Mm.
and that's part of our reality. And so I think it will look different for each of us, but I know there's also going to be folks out there who never had a problem with pills, never had a problem with drugs on the street. But during the pandemic, maybe they went from drinking on the weekends sometimes to drinking every day. Or maybe someone went from drinking a couple drinks a day to 4 or five or six to 7 or 8. These
Mm-hmm.
sorts of changes, sometimes they don't happen all at once. Sometimes there's a huge category of drinkers out there who what happens is they drink on average one more alcoholic beverage per week every year. And that might be fine for a little while. You can be fine having 3 or 4 drinks for a little while. But by the time you're 40, maybe that's
Yep.
5 or 6. By the time you're 45, maybe that's 7 or 8. By the time you're 50, that's 9 or 10. And
Mhm.
that's when things can really start to fall apart. And it's those spectrum things that we don't talk about enough, but can catch a lot of people. And man, is it easier to change your relationship with alcohol when you're having a couple drinks a day than when you're having 10 or 12.
Right. Right. That's just so true. And one thing, my father didn't say a lot of things that were very wise to me, but he did. For a long time, my life was one succession of bad events after the other. Um, but he was wise enough to say, lots of people drink all the time, but all it takes is being pulled over one time. And then all of a sudden your life has just been completely changed. And so it's like, even like as you're breaking that down, it's like, yeah, you could be one of those people that doesn't think you have a problem, but all of a sudden throw in a couple bad circumstances. And all of a sudden now the unmanaged, because you're right, it's an illusion. It's an illusion that you have control, but that illusion can be shattered. And why mess around with something that illusion can be shattered, and then your whole life can be shattered, right? It's just like this major turn of events that nobody ever plans on. They just happen. Now, in your book, you talk so much wisdom about the different things that you've learned since. Now, I'm not talking about just yourself and your own addiction, but just addiction as a whole. And so what are some of the bigger things that you learned about our nation, the way that it handles addiction, the drug policy, that like you had no idea until you're thrust into this world of, okay, this is why doctors act this way. This is why, there's a reason doctors they want to wash their hand of you and not deal with you anymore. Wasn't like that 20 years ago. Lots of policies, lots of things that have happened. And you learned a lot, and you highlight so many of them in your book, but what are some that you'd want our listeners to know about today?
Yeah, I think one big thing is how much we have conflated the negative effects of drugs on people's lives and the negative effects of how we have chosen to treat people who use drugs. And so one
Mm.
of the big examples for me is William Wilberforce. So growing up in an evangelical tradition, heard about William Wilberforce all the time as this great exemplar of faith. And he was a politician in Great Britain and was instrumental in ending the slave trade in Great Britain. And this guy, just example of faith, time and time again, he brings forward this legislation to be laughed at, to be ridiculed, to be told it would never, ever happen, that he was going against nature and God to suggest that we needed to get rid of the slave trade. And then finally, by the end of his life, it passed, and he helped end the slave trade. And he had this amazing conversion experience, right? Where he went from just being culturally, yeah, I show up at church sometime, to having this transformation in his life. He quit gambling, he quit drinking, but he never quit using laudanum, which was a mixture of opium and a little bit of wine. And then later, when he had quit alcohol, just using opium. He was never able to quit. And it wasn't good for his health, right? He kept using more and more. He had tried at different points to quit. He was never able to. But the entire time that he was on these opioids, he was still doing this work of faith, this work of faith to end the slave trade. And I always ask that what we need to imagine is how many William Wilberforces out there have we locked up? How many people who were potential community leaders have we thrown away and disregarded because of their addiction? And
Mm-hmm.
William Wilberforce was lucky that we just didn't know enough, right? The culture didn't know enough to say that he wasn't going to be worth anything.
Yeah.
And because of that, he did so much. And so I think we need to reframe a lot of these questions because Yeah. Does sometimes somebody show up at a doctor's office and do they tell a story to try to get a prescription? Yeah, but they're normally doing that because they felt so disrespected at the last place or because someone wouldn't listen to them another
Mhm.
time. And so these assumptions that we make about people who use drugs are often just the human nature, our own human nature, but it comes out in these bigger ways. And so that's one huge shift of how we think about people. Because I had assumed that if you were on a drug like an opioid, then you must not be doing anything else that's good in your life. When William
Mm.
Wilberforce is just such a great example of how that is not true.
That's so powerful because I think you then look at the shame, that the shame factor that keeps people stuck in addiction, because they'll begin to believe I can't be doing anything good in. Hey everyone, this is George Wood. Really hope you're enjoying this episode. If you could take just a moment and review, and please subscribe for more content, I would greatly appreciate it. My life. And so even if, they're not more or less, locked up in jails or whatever, we're just told so much that, drugs are just bad and you're just stupid if you're doing them, that very intelligent people, are often just don't even believe in themselves anymore. And once you don't believe in yourself anymore, then it's like, well, why not get high?
Absolutely. And that's too and one of the things I appreciate about your work is right this building upon some of the best that recovery has had to offer and also saying like let's keep going, let's move forward. There's still more to know, there's still more to understand about being in recovery, and we've got some unlearning to do and we've got some ways to move forward. And one of the other things that sticks out to me, and I'm going to go back a little ways and tell this story. So I did spend a summer as a missionary clown, and
What?
a missionary clown. I was 16 years old,
Okay.
and went to the thrift store and got like this all these clown outfits and had this big hat. My hair at the time was like out to here, so I didn't even need a wig, um, and learned how to juggle. And went with this group, and we went to Northern Ireland and then to London, and we'd all get together. We put on a little clown performance. Then all these people would gather around with their kids to watch, and then we'd stop it really suddenly. And so before people had a chance to disperse, we'd go out and be like, "Hey, have you heard of the four spiritual laws?" And needless to say, well-intentioned, didn't see a lot of gospel fruit that summer. Turns out a 16-year-old in a clown costume accosting you with the four spiritual laws isn't really Christianity's best foot forward. But we were passionate, right? Because this is true, right? Like my faith has transformed my life. It's transformed the lives of people that I know and love. And I've seen the power of the gospel to change people's lives. I want other people to experience what I've experienced. And that doesn't mean that every way we go about inviting people into that is always the best way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just like with, the clown costume, the same can be true about recovery. I talked to one woman after I gave a talk, and she walked up to me and she said, I have to confess, there's a lot of people out there I know that are still drinking because of how hard I tried to get them to a meeting. There's a lot of people out there still drinking because of how hard I tried to get them to a meeting.
Mm.
And in her passion to share what she had found, she actually broke relationships. She broke trust.
Yeah.
And she pushed people to places that they weren't ready for yet. And one of the things that I know you said recently in an interview that I loved is it's almost as if sometimes we forget to trust God and trust that God is at work and that we need to do it all in order
Mm-hmm.
to get the credit or something like that. And while I am excited every time somebody finds some kind of sobriety or recovery, however they define it, we do need to know that, you know, dressing up in a clown costume and forcing the four spiritual laws on people isn't Christianity's best foot forward. Sometimes we don't put recovery's best foot forward.
Mm.
And that there is great wisdom in this idea of being attractional more than promotional, and having others want to see and to be in proximity with those in need, and to have them be able to see what is different in our lives and to have that be an attractive thing for them. Because if people get pushed into something they aren't ready for, one of the other tragic things is they might try treatment or they might try something. And if it doesn't work the first time, they say, well, I must be broken.
Yep.
It will
Yeah.
never work for me. And they lose those connections and they don't distrust those pathways of help because they were pushed into it at a time when they might not have been ready. And so I think
Mm-hmm.
it's so important. This is where harm reduction comes in.
Mm-hmm.
What happens before someone says, yes, this is where I want to head. I want treatment. I want to go to a meeting. I want smart recovery. I want medically assisted treatment. Whatever it is, what happens before then? How do we set up a relationship of love and care for people who are in the midst of active use? And I think that's the beauty of harm reduction. I have
Mm-hmm.
loved the opportunities when I've gotten to volunteer at a syringe exchange, because I've gotten to just hand people syringes and to look them in the eye and just to let them know that they are cared for. And I noticed a pattern the first few times I went to volunteer at a syringe exchange. People wouldn't look me in the eye. But one of the things that we always would ask is, since the last time you've been here, have you reversed any overdoses? And oftentimes the answer was yes. And I would always stop and put down my pencil for a second, look that person in the eye and say, that is wonderful to hear. I am so glad you were there to be there and to save another person's life. You're a great friend. Sure enough, they'd kind of shuffle away. The next week they'd come back. Hey, have you reversed any overdoses since the last time we talked? This time they'd smile and they said, yeah, actually I did. I told a friend about this. And you know what? It was really exciting because they're wanting to take some steps to better their life now. Oh, that's great to hear. And then
Mm.
the next week coming back, and it wasn't all the time, but you know, after a few weeks, every once in a while, one of those people would say, "Hey, you said you're in recovery. Can we talk about that?" I'd say, "Yeah, I'd love to." And there are those seeds that we would plant, right? We know in scripture that sometimes there are people who plant the seeds, there are some who waters. And we
Mm-hmm.
got to trust that God gives the growth. That's what we're
Mm.
called. We're called to be faithful and loving others exactly where they are. And
Mm.
we got to trust that God can do the rest.
Why do you think that, we're just so afraid of doing that? Why are, um, we so afraid well, first off, could you give a description of what harm reduction is? Because I don't think everybody's going to know.
Yeah, so harm reduction, there's a couple different ways to look at it. One is kind of as a general philosophy, and then as a particular public health strategy. So, harm reduction as a strategy refers to a whole host of public health measures that meet people who use drugs or even in other sorts of activities. So, like harm reduction is, we know that driving is dangerous. Driving with a seatbelt is less dangerous. Driving with a seatbelt is harm reduction. We know that drug use has a whole host of dangers associated with it, but it's more dangerous to reuse a syringe because it can spread HIV/AIDS, hepatitis C, give you skin and blood infections, than it is to use drugs and use a new syringe every time. So a harm reduction strategy would be a syringe exchange where people who use drugs can show up and get new syringes to use in a way that's going to be less dangerous than they might be otherwise. And what's funny is with harm reduction, a lot of people have been concerned because typically, you hand out something for free and you're going to get people doing more of that thing, right? If we subsidize something in public policy, we tend to get more of that thing, right? We subsidize solar panels, so more people put up solar panels. So there's often a resistance of this idea of saying, wait a minute, aren't you subsidizing substance use? So aren't we going to get more of it? But this has now been studied for decades. And what they find is that people who start using a syringe exchange program are actually 30% more likely to seek out recovery services than those who aren't using one. And they think the primary reason why that is because you are creating a regular relationship of trust and care with people who can then provide additional resources. And so it's counterintuitive, and I get why people kind of, jump back from it at first because it doesn't sound right. But how it functions in the world are people being more likely to seek out additional services. Because you're right, like somebody who has lost all hope, right? Sometimes they see recovery and it sounds scary and they think, I can't do that. I've tried before. It's not for me. I'm not that person. But if you're able to help them say, all right, maybe that's too much right now. But what if we take care of the sores on your arms and the open wounds you have from injecting? What if those clear up? Let's work on that. Let's take care of that. And sometimes that little victory is what gives people the confidence to say, oh, yeah, my arms are looking great. I am feeling better. What's next? What's the next step? What's the next step?
It's all about, once again, it goes back to the whole relationship. It's about most people that are stuck in addiction don't feel worthy of a relationship. And so little seeds like that prove like they could be worthy of a relationship. There could be the chance of connection. And once you start, it's, my thing is like, we have to show people a reason, a purpose, a reason to stay sober. You have to give a person a life that's worth staying sober for. And once we do that, people can begin the hard work of getting sober or whatever. When we just tell people you're doing stupid things, you need to figure it out, get sober. People can't see the possibility that they can overcome. And so the little seeds of, even at a needle exchange, somebody caring enough about them to go against the grain of what seems like a rational thought is like, okay, so maybe there is hope for me. Maybe there's a hope for a relationship, which leads me into my next question, drug policy, because it's very similar to how you just laid that out. Where it's counterintuitive that giving out free needles would mean a 30% decrease in the long run. But the reality is there's something that happens internally that changes things. And so what are some of the things that drug policy is actually hurting or needs to maybe be relooked at?
Yeah, this is, so important to understand with where we're at today, because I think a big reason for that fear of wanting to move people as quickly as possible is just how dangerous our drug supply is in the United States today. And nothing illustrates this tragic nature of this more than teenage overdose deaths. So teenage overdose deaths for about 10 years had stayed roughly the same at around 500 per year, which is already terrible to think about, but they had been roughly averaging around there. Now, at the same time, we've seen teenage drug use continue to go down, teenage alcohol use continue to go down. Teenage use of things like Percocet and Vicodin has dramatically dropped in the past few years because there's just more public awareness around the dangers. And then during the pandemic, because teens tend to use in social environments, a lot of the shutdowns, drug use dropped even more. So we're at some of the lowest teenage drug use rates that we've seen since we started tracking. And in the past few years, teenage overdose rates have more than doubled. For 2021, I believe it was around 1,200 teenage overdose deaths.
Wow.
And that's because the drug supply is vastly more dangerous today than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. And that's actually a very predictable pattern through what we call the iron law of prohibition. So this overdose crisis has happened in three waves. And the first was prescription opioids. All heard about Purdue Pharma. Trust me, I have nothing good to say about Purdue Pharma. But when the public policy reaction to realizing that there's this increased rate of overdoses and addiction to opioids was to simply crack down on the supply. And that's when the iron law of prohibition kicks in. So in an economic market, we have what they're called elastic and inelastic demands. And so elastic ones are ones that change quite significantly. The price goes up, demand goes down because people don't want to pay it. Drugs, because they're addictive, are relatively inelastic. People do what it takes to get the substance no matter what. And that's what we saw happen. So the federal government starts to crack down on the supply of prescription opioids without taking care of the people who are addicted. And what happens? All those people move to street heroin. So instead of things getting better, overdoses spike again. Federal government once again says, well, let's crack down on heroin. So crack down on heroin. What happens? Drug traffickers move from heroin to fentanyl. And this is the same thing that happened under alcohol prohibition. We made alcohol illegal. People moved from beer and wine to spirits and liquor and moonshine. And that's when we went from having an alcohol supply where people were, hurting their bodies over the course of years to suddenly somebody has a drink of moonshine and they go blind. Or somebody has too much moonshine and they die. They get poisoned. So our alcohol overdose rate skyrocketed. And the same thing happened here with the overdose crisis. When we focused just on the supply, we incentivized the drug markets to continue to make their products more and more potent in order to evade detection and in order to transport it. So now we've got fentanyl just going through the mail because it's so potent. And that's why we have such a high overdose rate today. Now, we've got a country like Portugal that took a very different route. Portugal had a high rate of IV drug use, just like we do in the United States today. And they said, what's a public health approach that focuses more on demand than on supply? And in Portugal, they decriminalized personal possession of all drugs, which if you had asked me before I started my research, I would have said sounded like a terrible idea. But what happened is their overdose rate, because they took those resources that were being focused on the supply side, and they focused it on supporting people in recovery, giving people jobs who didn't have jobs before, getting people back into job training, getting them reintegrated into the community. They took all of those resources and said, let's focus on how we help people reintegrate. And their overdose rate today is one of the lowest in the European Union and a fraction of what we see here in the United States. The one other country that faced a similar problem that we're seeing today and took a different approach is Switzerland. And in Switzerland, they looked at everything. They had a huge public encampment right in front of the Swiss equivalent of the White House, open air drug market, people openly using, high rates of HIV, AIDS spreading, Hep C spreading, lots of petty crime and theft and property crimes for people who are trying to steal in order to afford their drug habit. And they said, once again, all right, let's look at the full spectrum of what we're doing. Methadone works for some people. Buprenorphine works for some people. An abstinence-based program is working for other people. But we've got this whole other population that has cycled through those programs, and now they're disconnected. They aren't showing up. We don't have a way to reach them. What could we do to engage these folks? And they decided, let's expand our medically assisted treatment portfolio. Let's have another tool in our quiver. And so they started diacetyl morphine treatment, where people who had tried other treatment modalities could show up and once or twice or 3 times a day get as much diacetyl morphine as they wanted. And what they immediately saw was HIV/AIDS rates, Hep C rates plummeted. Crime dropped precipitously. And the spread of drug use actually slowed. And they ended up having a lower rate of overall drug use. And now, for those of you who aren't familiar with what diacetyl morphine is, it's also known as diamorphine, or on the street, it's known as heroin. The Swiss government started giving away in a controlled environment free heroin to people who were addicted. And the result was 10 years later, a smaller portion of their population uses heroin today than when they started this program giving away free heroin. Because once again,
that's crazy, right?
It's wild, but it also, the big piece there is it keeps people alive. You're not in danger. They've never had an overdose at one of these centers. And it helps people stabilize their lives. And the other pieces, while at first, right, people just kept going, every year there's going to be a percentage of people who have what they call like a spontaneous remission, right? Where without even treatment, they just suddenly have like a Saul to Paul moment, everything changes, and they move into some kind of recovery. They step out of the program voluntarily. Then other people are going to keep showing up, and one day they say, man, like I am ready for another form of treatment. I don't want to keep doing this. And there is a percentage who are continuing to use, but even for that percentage, they're able to stabilize their lives. And just like William Wilberforce, who never kicked his opioid habit, still can do good and productive and meaningful things. And what really shifted for me in reading about this program, because I wanted to detail it. I didn't even talk about Switzerland in my book because I felt like I hadn't read up on it enough yet. What really shifted it for me was one day realizing that's what my doctor did for me.
Mm-hmm.
He continued to prescribe to me, and I was still on opioids while I was getting cognitive behavioral therapy and while I was learning to address my pain in new ways. And if it worked for me, there's a population of people out there who it can work for. And once again, we need all these different methodologies. We need abstinence-based recovery. That's beautiful and wonderful for people who find that. We need medically assisted treatment. We need smart recovery for people who've been burned by the church or spirituality. We need motivational interviewing. We need cognitive behavioral therapy. We need every tool we can possibly get to address this crisis because it's huge and we need to find what works for each individual.
I mean, the evidence is more and more like well-known, beyond people like just you and me and those of us that have been through this, but people just gravitate towards stricter laws and build the wall, contain our borders, stricter law. Let's have executions for all high-level drug dealers. I mean, the crazy stuff that this political season is bringing, because that's, I know some people that work in the political sphere and they're like, this is what's coming. They're going to be people pushing for executions of high-level drug dealers and, of course, stricter borders. So be prepared to defend against that. How do guys like you and me like try to help people understand that those are two horrible answers that will not change this problem?
Yeah, first is, what I like to start when I'm talking to any Christian audience is to say, I can tell you today that the most powerful thing that has ever transformed my life is a free gift of grace that I did not earn. And I, as a Christian, I believe that the most powerful force in the universe is love and grace. And I don't believe that just because I'm a Christian. I believe that Christianity teaches that because it's true about the universe.
Mm.
And that the way the world thinks, if you're a Christian, the way the world thinks is that force and violence is the most powerful thing that we can engage. The cross says that's not true.
Mm.
So I want to start with that very basic value. And then we need to get more specific, because when we start talking about things like the iron law of prohibition, we can demonstrate that this law and order crackdown, it wasn't that it was an ineffective way to try to address our overdose crisis. It is the reason we have an overdose crisis. It's the reason we have illicit fentanyl on our streets today. And when it comes to the building a wall, we know these cartels, they're multi-billion-dollar businesses. They're smart. What they're doing is they're hiring Americans to drive fentanyl across the border through ports of entry, or they're shipping it through the mail. You can spend billions more on a wall, and the cartels are laughing all the way to the bank. It's like a cartel support bill, right? They're laughing at it. And we actually know this from the rise of cocaine trafficking. What happens if we go into Mexico or another Central or South American country and we take out all the big cartel leaders? We know exactly what happens. The drug supply is interrupted for maybe a couple of weeks, and then there's a huge increase in violence as that multi-billion-dollar market is still there, and everybody who's left starts fighting for that market share. Violence skyrockets, and that means even more people are displaced from their home and are going to be trying to come to the United States. So if you support these big, like, let's just go to Mexico and like take out every cartel, if you're supporting that, we know what the result is going to be. And that's going to be increased violence. And we're going to have even more folks coming to seek refuge at our border because of the violence that has caused. And finally, we do know that there has been one country in the world that successfully dramatically decreased the supply of opioids in their country almost overnight.
Australia.
Australia.
Yeah.
And what happened in Australia? So they had 3 major drug trafficking groups, and they did all this huge work to have international cooperation to shut down these 3 major groups all at once. Almost overnight, 50% of the supply of drugs, of heroin coming into Australia dries up. And so the remaining heroin skyrockets in price, and a few things happen. Overdoses skyrocket because now the supply is incredibly inconsistent and is mixed with a lot of other things. Crime skyrockets because there's a lot of people who are addicted and are looking for their next fix, and they go out and they're doing whatever they can to try to get it. Third thing that happens is a huge increase in methamphetamine use, because it's not uncommon for people who are addicted, if they can't get their drug of choice, they're going to switch to something else that's cheaper and available. And so methamphetamine use skyrockets, and it took years, they think, for there to be any positive effect on a societal level from that supply reduction strategy. And so even if it was successful, what we would be looking at is a dramatic increase in crime and overdoses as a result. And this is where we've got to talk about better options. We need to talk about demand reduction. We need to talk about harm reduction. And we need to talk about how do we keep people alive and safe if and when they come to that point in their life where they are ready to move into a different stage and leave that substance use behind them.
Woo, man, I could sit here and listen to this all day, because I feel like that confirmation bias, where I'm like, yes, yes, let's go do something today. Like we got to make a change. You've got me. You had me at hello. Man, I just want to say thank you. We could sit here and talk for hours about this. I know I didn't even get to, well, I'll have to have you come back, but get to the effects of the drug laws on being able to do research on other possibly helpful medications. I sat through one of your classes on that where we met at the last conference, and I was just blown away by that on the, just the way that we can't even do the research that we could be doing that could really be changing lives. And so next time we'll have to hit some of that, but I just want to say thank you for coming on. This has been just, I hope, honor, there's honor for me, but enlightening for those that are listening or watching, because we need to make some changes in the way that we look at things and the way that we handle things.
And thank you, George, for the way that you have turned your story into such a message of hope for so many people, and not just the words you say, but how you live it out. It's transformative, and I appreciate seeing that.
Amen. Stick around. Don't go anywhere. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Hey everyone, this is George Wood, the Tattooed Pastor, just saying thank you for listening today. Really hope you've enjoyed the episode. Be sure to leave a review, subscribe for more content as we try to educate, equip, and empower the world to walk with the lost in a better way. Thanks again.